Chapter 21 of Tractate Shabbos continues with some further points on touching Muktzeh items on Shabbos. The first Mishnah says you can pick up your son even if he's holding a stone. You can also lift a basket even if there's a stone inside. You can similarly move impure teruma with pure teruma, or chulin, which is unconsecrated food. Also, in general, you can remove 1 part teruma from a mixer with 100 parts chulin. The Gemara says in regards to the issue of transferring between domains, if you carry a child which has a pouch around its neck, you're liable for carrying the pouch, not for the child, as this is like the opinion that a living creature supports its own weight, so there's no issue in carrying a child. The pouch is not an accessory to the child, as it doesn't service him. If it's a corpse, you'd be exempt, as that's like the opinion that you're exempt for a labor not needed for its defined purpose. This is unlike our Mishnah, where you're allowed to pick up the child, as it's a child who is longing for his father and will become sick if not lifted, so it's allowed over there. It mentions a stone and not a coin, as if the child drops a stone, the father won't pick it up. We bring a proof. The basket we're discussing is not being the base of a forbidden object, as there's produce in the basket that the stone's resting on. It also is where you can't dump everything out to get rid of the stone and put the produce back in, as these are produce that will get ruined if they're dumped out. It's also not an option to just shake the basket, as it's actually a basket with a hole in it, and the stone is lodged inside, so it's therefore no longer muktzeh. The points on teruma are discussed, and points on mental designation. New Mishnah. A stone on the opening of a cask. You can tilt the cask to get the stone off. You can also move the cask to a safe place to do this. You can similarly shake money on a pillow so it falls off. Also, if you have a dirty pillow, you can wipe it with a cloth, but not rinse it with water. If it's a leather pillow, then you can pour water on it until it's clean. The Gemara says you can't tilt the cask to remove the stone if it was put there intentionally, as the cask is now the base of a forbidden object and can no longer be moved. It also discusses moving the cask. With the money on a pillow, it also says by the same logic this is where it was left unintentionally, and it's where you need to use the pillow. If you need the place of the pillow, you can just move it with the money on it. It also says that you can put a loaf or a child on many objects to be able to move them. Some only allow it by a corpse. There are similar notions brought. It also allows giving intestines to a cat if you intended that the previous day, as they'll go bad. There are similar rules. New Mishnah. Further in regards to muktzeh items on a table. Some say you can remove bones and husks from a table by hand, others require you to take the whole table board and shake it clean. You can remove from a table crumbs that are smaller than an olive size, or pea and lentil pods if they are fit for animal fodder. Also, if a sponge has a leather handle, you can wipe a table with it if it's damp. If not, then no. It can be taken on Shabbos when it's dry either way, and is not susceptible to the laws of impurity. The Gemara says that the argument of removing shells from a table by hand, the two opinions are actually switched around. Based on the point on crumbs, they may not be destroyed manually, even if smaller than the listed amounts. The opinion that has a more lenient view on muktzeh, allowing removing pea pods, still wouldn't allow using a handleless sponge, since it's a definitive, inevitable action that you're going to squeeze water out, which is forbidden on Shabbos. It discusses some other fodders and their statuses of muktzeh, and the disposal of date pits. That's the end of chapter 21. Chapter 22 of Tractate Shabbos starts with a Mishnah discussing a broken cask of wine. You can save enough for 3 meals, and you can even get other people to save wine from it for themselves, but you can't sponge up the wine, out of concern that you'll end up squeezing it. Similarly, no juicing fruits on Shabbos, and if the juice squeezed out by itself, then no eating it on Shabbos, as it could lead you to juicing them. Others allow the fruit juice if the fruits were stored for eating, but not if stored for their juice. Similarly, honeycomb chopped before Shabbos. The honey that came out on its own during Shabbos, it's argued if you could eat it. The Gemara argues the points on squeezing fruits, and it says that there's an exception by olives or grapes stored for eating, that their juice is not allowed on Shabbos, as people sometimes redesignate them after seeing them juiced. Others disagree on this exception, and others say it's disagreed, but we hold strictly by olives and grapes. There are further discussion on similar fruits. This gets into a point on impurity, and further on olives and grapes in baskets where the juice is clearly being abandoned, so clearly the dealt with case is by a sealed container. This and similar points are argued further. Some allow squeezing a cluster of grapes into a pot of food on Shabbos, but not into a bowl, as it's used for food, so it's regarded as food. There's a similar point by goat milked into a pot and not a bowl. Some disagree based on principles. This is argued further along with a dispute on squeezing boiled or pickled vegetables. It also sidetracks into a point on a valid testimony on the blemishes of a firstborn animal, and say that in that regard, a witness who received his testimony from a different witness is considered to be giving a valid testimony. It also discusses the point on honeycomb. New Mishnah: anything placed in hot water before Shabbos can be soaked in hot water on Shabbos. If it was not placed in hot water before Shabbos, you can rinse it with hot water on Shabbos. This excludes aged salted fish or salted Spanish mackerel, as rinsing them is how you finish cooking them. The Gemara mentions an example of a dish that was cooked in hot water and then soaked for a while after, which was a hen made by a Rav Abba, and a different sage said it was disgusting. A different sage also expressed revulsion at a different food, which was named Babylonian kutach, which was a dip of a sort made of breadcrumbs and whey. Others did enjoy that, though. It says rinsing that fish is a biblical violation. It also says some miscellaneous teachings, like birds in Babylon are fatter than from Israel, as the birds of Israel were exiled along with the Jewish people, and this is discussed further. It also says that the festivals of Babylon were more joyous, as the festivals of Israel were cursed in the book of Hosea, so then troops kept plundering or taxes were imposed on festivals. It also says that Babylonians had nicer garb, as they weren't native to that locale. It also says that idol worshippers are not pure, as they didn't stand at Mount Sinai, and Eve received impurity from the serpent, passed it on, and it was only removed from those that stood by Mount Sinai. As for converts, their mazel was there. Others say that impurity left people after 3 generations from Eve, seen as Yaakov sired 12 good sons without any aberrations. New Mishnah: on Shabbos you may break open a cask to eat dried figs from it, as long as your intent is not to make a vessel. There's a disagreement if you can pierce a hole through a cask's stopper. You can pierce a hole in its side. If the cask was perforated, no plugging the hole with wax, as you'll smooth it. Someone once did this, and the sage Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was worried that the man had done a biblical violation. The Gemara explains that we're discussing pressed produce specifically, which needs to be cut apart, hence the mention of figs. Others argue on these points. We said breaking open a cask of wine was permitted. There's a question on puncturing the cask with a spear, which we said is not allowed, as he's clearly creating a new opening, and it's not to get a flow of wine, because then he just unstopper the cask. Everyone agrees about piercing a hole in the top of the stopper. The argument is about making a hole through the side of the stopper, and when the Mishnah said that you can't pierce a hole through its side, that was referring to the body of the cask. This is discussed further. There's also points on expanding existing holes, whether holes are one-way or two-way by a chicken coop, etc. It also allows reopening an old hole if it was plugged to preserve the wine, not to strengthen it. This depends on if the plug is above or below the wine level. There's some additional points on this. It also gets into cutting a reed to serve as a spigot. There's an argument on using thick oil to plug a cask hole on Shabbos. Some say it's allowed. Others forbid plugging the hole with a myrtle leaf, either to prevent people from thinking you're allowed to make an artificial gutter-like vessel, or out of concern people will pluck a leaf from a branch. There's a practical difference between these opinions by a pre-plucked and placed leaf from before Shabbos. There's an argument regarding wrapping yourself with felt padding to transfer it through a public domain on Shabbos. New Mishnah: you can put a cooked dish in a cool, dry pit in Shabbos so it's preserved, and you can put a container of good water into stale water so it cools off, or into the sun so it warms. If your clothes fell in water while traveling, you can wear them on Shabbos and not worry people will think that you did laundry. When it gets to an outermost courtyard, he should then spread out his clothes to dry in the sun, but not in front of people, or they'll think you did laundry then. The Gemara explains that we needed to say the point on preserving a cool dish in a pit, as you might have thought it's not allowed out of concern of smoothing depressions in the ground. The same goes for putting water in the sun, which you might have thought you can't do it in case it leads you to bury food in warm ashes, which is not allowed. The opinion that you can put your wet clothes in the sun if no one will see is unlike the opinion that you can't do something that looks like a wrongdoing even in private where no one will see it. There's further on this about shaking your cloak, not allowing it if it's old or white or red. Some allow it, some say we allow it if it's just dew. This and further points are discussed. It also lists further things that you can't do with your clothes on Shabbos, like folding up your hem so it doesn't drag, something called a Babylonian pocket. There are further points on this, and points on not traveling with a folded cloak on your shoulder. New Mishnah: if you bathe in cave water or in a hot spring, no matter how dry you are, no carrying a towel you use to dry yourself. Out of concern you'll end up wringing it out. If multiple people use the towel, that's allowed, as the others will remind him not to wring it out. You can apply oil to your body by hand on Shabbos, but not vigorously, and you may not scrape the skin. No going to this specific river on Shabbos, the Kurdima, which will be explained. No taking an emetic to induce vomiting, no straightening out an infant's limbs, no setting a broken bone, no massaging a dislocated limb with cold water, but you can just bathe like normal, and if it heals you, then great. The Gemara says that the fact that we say cave waters and hot springs together, it must be we're referring to hot cave water, according to one opinion that allows bathing in hot water on Shabbos. It's also allowed to rinse yourself, even initially, according to this opinion. It also explains the points on the concern of wringing out a towel, that it's fine with multiple people. Others argue on the towel point. It also has further points on bringing people towels in a bathhouse while wearing them in a certain manner, and garments to soldiers, also in a specific way. In regards to applying oil to skin, some say we apply it and then rub it, others allow it at the same time. Along with vigorously rubbing oil onto yourself, it mentions other therapeutic things like certain wine and mud, and says the 10 tribes were lost because people were too involved in those pursuits. It mentions one sage that forgot all his Torah knowledge because he was enticed by these things, and he later went up to read from the Torah and messed it all up, so the sages asked God to have mercy on him, and his Torah knowledge was returned. It further explains the Mishnah's remaining medicinal concepts. We do hold you can set a broken bone. The point on dislocation is also conversed on, and that's the end of chapter 22.